Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest of our series of exhibition lectures in association with the exhibition currently downstairs, Time and Cosmos and Greco-Roman Antiquity. I'm Alexander Jones. I was the curator for the exhibition. I'm also the interim director at ISAW. And tonight it's my great delight to introduce Richard Talbert, who comes to us from the University of North Carolina and who is, I think one could say, synonymous with the mapping of the ancient world. In progressing towards his interest in the topic of tonight's talk, I think one can see two trends within that preoccupation of his. One of them in moving from the modern to the ancient, and the other from the massive to the portable. The massive and the modern being represented by this astonishing work, the Barrington Atlas of the Greek and Roman world, which I think came out in 2000 in its physical form, and is the definitive map using modern cartographic data of the Greco-Roman world. It is barely portable, but for several years it has been possible to get a truly portable version of it for devices such as iPads. And also the ancient, modern to ancient, that I think to a great extent as an offshoot of the project of the Barrington Atlas, he has been delving into many understudied and fascinating aspects of ancient perceptions of space and their visual representations. And this has included work on the Poitinger map, a medieval copy of some highly debated ancient prototype map of the world in a kind of strip format, which he lectured on at ISAW in 2013 when he previously gave a talk in connection with our exhibition on measuring and mapping the ancient world. Tonight, he's talking about devices which those of us who are aware of them at all, and many more are now that we have several downstairs on display, people tend to think of as instruments associated with time, portable sundials. But his talk will show, I believe, among other things, that there is a very significant spatial element to them as well, and one can think of them as a kind of conceptual map of the Roman world too. And in fact, he has very recently had published a marvelous study of the portable sundials, and particularly the ones that have geographical data on them, which is called, very sensibly, Roman Portable Sundials, the Empire, not the Emperor, in your hand. And it's Oxford University Press, and very nicely produced with a lot of marvelous photographs as well as descriptions of the sundials, including several of the ones, I think 3 of the sundials that we have downstairs. So I won't delay any longer his talk. Richard.
Well, Alex, thank you very much. That's an extremely kind introduction. I would just like to qualify it, if I could, in all modesty, by saying that this beastie was by no means my own creation alone. Something like 200 other scholars joined me in making it. It's true, I suppose, that orchestras have to have a conductor, and somebody has to keep the ship afloat and so on, and I suppose that was my job, and I was the whipping boy, but this was very much an international collaborative enterprise, and I'm very grateful to everyone who was involved in that and who also sustained it by contributing funding. Well, it is a great pleasure to be here again at ISAW this evening, and to have the opportunity, actually for me the second time, to see the Time and Cosmos exhibit, about which I cannot offer sufficient compliments. It is a truly marvelous exhibition. But for my lecture, let me begin by warning you that frankly, the vital element of my lecture is latitude data, recorded in Greek and Latin, probably between the 2nd and 4th centuries CE. Now, if this makes you think, oh no, why did I come? It will now be so boring. It was sundials I wanted, and he's going to talk about latitude data. No, 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 no. Please do not be discouraged. The lecture may not prove quite so boring, and there will be plenty about sundials. I should explain. As we all know, the concept of a latitude-longitude grid encompassing the Earth is a Greek one in origin, and it continues in use today as a standard means of fixing locations. In the first instance, the concept is closely associated with Eratosthenes' calculation of the Earth's circumference during the 3rd century BCE. Next, Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE, and then Marinus, somewhere around 100 CE, are each credited with the development of the concept. But almost nothing of their work survives, and the ancient appraisals we have of it are far from favorable. By contrast, Ptolemy's famous work, the Geography, dating to somewhere around 150 CE, does survive. And it preserves latitude and longitude coordinates for over 6,000 locations. Much of this data, Ptolemy says that he took over from Marinus, although he roundly condemns Marinus' style of expressing it as inconsistent, unreliable, and confusing. So, instead, Ptolemy says with pride, he expresses it in his own new, concise, user-friendly style on a scale of 90 degrees with fractions of a degree always expressed as 1/12. So in our terms, units of 5 minutes, because there are 60 minutes to a degree. And this is the style still in use today. Ptolemy's coordinates expressed in this way are fundamental components of his geography and of the map making which it makes possible. We all know very well, of course, that during the Renaissance, from the 15th century onwards, Ptolemy's geography made a huge impact. But what impact it made during antiquity has been a puzzle. Because there are next to no signs of the geography actually being used, the general conclusion, reasonably enough, has always been that it was pretty much ignored. In this connection, however, scholars have overlooked the latitude figures inscribed on the reverses of a dozen bronze portable sundials retrieved from across the Roman world. And you can see these figures in list form on your handout. Everybody ought to have a handout. It's one sheet double-sided. There are 7 lists in Greek on one side and 5 in Latin on the other. It's these figures and their associated location names that form my main focus tonight and the focus of my book, which Alex has very kindly advertised already, Roman Portable Sundials, The Empire in Your Hand. And if books will sell by their cover, I think this one might do well, because I think it's a smashing cover. I think it's a really, really good Now, I have to confess, please forgive me, I have to confess that the sundials themselves are only of secondary interest to me. They've received plenty of attention from other people, though it's always been narrowly focused, pretty much confined to discussions by specialists about how accurately such miniature instruments can tell the time. These specialists have certainly noticed the latitude figures, but given their limited concerns, they have never investigated them. My aim as a historian has been to develop a further and broader focus because I detect untapped potential here for some rewarding exploration of intellectual and social and cultural questions. Now, understood, I take a risk in daring to do this. But please, bear with me and see what you think of my efforts. And undoubtedly, there will be a question period at the end, and you can condemn me roundly then. That's fine, but I take the risk. Now, you should bear in mind that the sundials I'm talking about, for the most part, really are miniature in size. They're comparable to a pocket watch or a large wristwatch, easily held in one hand. And tonight, very unusually, I'm in the enviable position of being able to say, if you think I'm exaggerating, go downstairs and look at them. Because here, amazingly, in the Time and Cosmos exhibition, you have the chance to view close up as many as 4 of the sundials featured on the handout. 3 are inscribed in Greek. There is the one from the Science Museum, and I think this is actually the one where you can see the names most easily downstairs. That is very clear. There is the one from Philippi, which is rather different in nature, and those names aren't so easy to see, but you can certainly make out some of the lettering. There's the one that used to be in the Time Museum when it existed, up I think until 1999 in Rockford, Illinois. This is now in a private collection belonging to an anonymous private owner who is very protective of it. I don't think he's ever allowed it out to an exhibition, and I'm sure he never will again. So this is a remarkable opportunity here that you have to see it. The 4th one that you can see is inscribed in Latin. That's also the one on the front of my book from the Museum of the History of Science in Oxford in England. And I have to stress what an astonishing privilege it is for us to see all these 4 in the same room. And I think we should all be extremely grateful to ISOR and its supporters for putting together this exhibition. This one from Oxford is actually the smallest. It's just under 2.5 inches in diameter, although it has as many as 30 latitude figures and location names inscribed on it. The most basic type of portable sundial produced in the Roman world was made for a single latitude and wasn't adjustable for use at any other latitude. And in the exhibition, you can see 3 examples of such sundials. I've taken this from the catalogue. 2 are of the cylinder type, these 2. And the 3rd one, it's rather curious, comes from Herculaneum. Well, we think of it as this ham shape. Whether it was really meant to be a ham shape originally, whether it was that shape, or whether it's got distorted in the eruption of Vesuvius and so on, we're not sure. There is a National Geographic feature available on the web at the moment about this one. It's created quite a lot of discussion. This one comes from the tomb of a doctor. He seems to have been an oculist in northern Italy, and the other contents of his tomb are also on display downstairs. And this one is very little known from a museum in central France. However, the portable sundials that interest me are more versatile, more than set for just a single latitude. They can be used across a whole range of latitudes because their design makes it possible to adjust for the 2 variables that must be set correctly for the sundial to give the right time. And that's further explained in the blurb for this sundial downstairs. The 2 variables are, 1, the time of year at the location where the user is, and the other is the latitude of that location. Well, let's hope that you, the user, know already the time of year. But understandably, on your travels, you may not know offhand the latitude of where you find yourself at that time. So that's why, on their reverse, typically, these sundials have a kind of speed dial list, if you like. They include as many as 36 locations. This one has 30, but there are others that have as many as 36, each with its latitude figure. Places that you might want to use the sundial in, and you can then be spared the bother of having to make inquiries among the locals about what the latitude there is. Now, I should explain that the existence of this speed dial list doesn't affect the functioning of the sundial. You can set it for anywhere you like, anywhere within reason, any latitude you like. You're not confined to using it to the 30 places there. And I should also just put in now that if you're wondering why the longitude of the locations isn't given as well, that's simply because for this purpose, longitude is irrelevant. For this type of sundial to work, all you need to know is the latitude. You don't need the longitude. So, what can the historian determine about this adjustable type of portable sundial, each with its list? Well, in the first instance, to date these instruments might be helpful. But in fact, to date them with much precision is hardly feasible, because most have come to light as random finds from all over the Roman world, rather than surfacing in well-documented professional excavations. Even so, we can note from our handout, if you look on the Greek side of the handout, we can note that here we find that on 6 out of the 7, Constantinople is one of the locations chosen for listing. And as you may know, the former city of Byzantium was only renamed Constantinople in the 320s CE. So these ones cannot be earlier than the 320s CE. The other thing is that if you look here, and if you also look on the Latin side, it's surely striking that all the latitude figures are expressed in the user-friendly style devised by Ptolemy for his geography. So I would suggest that the earliest possible date for sundials inscribed like this has to be the mid-2nd century. The geography was was written, compiled around about 150 CE. So this must be the earliest possible time. And here, moreover, therefore, we have evidence for relatively widespread adoption by Romans of Ptolemy's style of expressing latitude. And so, by extension, perhaps also for consultation of his geography to learn what a particular location's latitude was. So yes, one of the things we certainly ought to do is to check how far the latitude figures on the sundials do in fact match those offered by Ptolemy in the geography. And that's something I'll come back to in a moment. I think, but I'm very open to correction and challenge on this, please help me if you're able, but I think I'm correct in claiming that the latitudes on the sundials like this are the only ones that we have from antiquity in addition to those in Ptolemy's geography. I do realize that while the geography offers the latitudes for over 6,000 locations, as I've said, the sundials between them preserve figures for only about a mere 115, which is a small number by comparison with Ptolemy's 6,000. But still, the 115 are precious testimony. And its size will surely grow because I believe more such sundials are certain to be found sooner or later. It's also testimony that reveals unexpectedly the shared comprehension and exploitation of latitude by what I envisage as a loose community or fellowship of designers, owners, users. A fellowship that has to be broader than a narrow circle of science specialists like Ptolemy himself. In that event, social, cultural, intellectual questions then arise. Who were these people? I mean, who made up this so-called loose community? Why did they want a sundial that incorporated such information? And by what means was awareness of how to use latitude disseminated when such a topic was most unlikely to feature in the typical school curriculum? If you just glance through the lists, you can see, surely, you perceive that the locations appear to be sets of consciously selective individual choices, rather than the mere reproduction of some standard anodyne, one-size-fits-all compilation by a workshop. I think there's only one instance where we might suspect that you've got a workshop compilation, something that's sort of anodyne and one-size-fits-all, and that's these two Latin ones, Chatillard and Rome. If you look at those two lists, they're pretty much the same, and they're pretty bizarre, pretty useless, actually. But that's something we could talk about more later if you want to, but they really are very curious. I think that's made up by a workshop, not by an individual with specific tastes. But despite the variety of locations chosen overall, I see every list appearing to adhere remarkably to at least 4 conventions. They all adhere to these conventions. 1, only a single latitude figure is associated with a location, even when it is not a city, but a region or a province that any latitude-conscious person would know to extend through several degrees. I'll come back to this again, but I'm thinking of areas like Gaul or Italy or Egypt. Anybody with basic geographic knowledge in the ancient world would know that those were regions that extended through much more than a single degree of latitude. What Ptolemy does in his geography is, for regions, he offers coordinates for its furthest points. 2, when the compiler of a list is prepared to state latitudes to a fraction of a degree, and that's something which some compilers chose to do and others evidently didn't, the fraction is never more precise than 1/3, 1/2, or 2/3, whereas Ptolemy is prepared to be precise to 1/12 of a degree. 3rd, only regions or islands or provinces or cities are selected for listing. If you see here, never a physical feature like a mountain range or a river, never the River Rhine or the River Danube or the River Nile, for example. Also, never a people. People in the ancient world are very conscious of peoples, tribes, if you like. No people is ever listed here. Finally, 4th, when what we call a homonymous city is listed, somewhere like Adrianople or Antioch or Caesarea or Heraclea, and by that adjective I mean, of course, cities that have the same name. There are lots of Caesareas, lots of Antiochs, all over, well, in the east of the Roman world, there is never any further indication of which one is meant except through the accompanying latitude figure. So there's never a gloss like, it never says Pisidian Antioch, just so that you can distinguish that from Syrian Antioch, for example. It never says Heraclea Pontica, because, of course, there are lots of Heracleas all over the place. The only way to distinguish is to look at the latitude figure. Well, let me return now quickly to the matter of how far the latitudes on the sundials match those offered by Ptolemy in his geography. Now, naturally, even when there is an exact match, that can't prove reliance on Ptolemy's work, because other sources for latitudes, too, may have offered the same figure. Other sources for latitudes? That's an intriguing question. What sources would those have been? We don't know. We've no idea. We can only speculate. At least, however, for some of the cities listed most often, there is striking all-round concurrence. For example, Alexandria is found on 7 lists altogether, and it's invariably 30 or 31. In Ptolemy, it's actually 31. Similarly, the latitude for Rome, which is included in 7 lists, is always between 41 and 42, and in Ptolemy it's 41 and 2/3. In stark contrast, Constantinople, which is listed 6 times, the variance is as wide as 2 and 2/3 degrees. At the lowest, 40 and 1/3, at the highest, 43. While Ptolemy's latitude is a tad higher still at 43 and 1/12. The variance for Thessalonica, which is listed 5 times, is even wider. It's 40 to 43, whereas Ptolemy's figure is 40 and 1/3. So in these 2 cases, Constantinople and Salonika, some of the sundial list compilers chose a figure close to Ptolemy's, while others chose one that was appreciably different. Why should there be such wide variances? Well, there you have another topic for speculation. As it happens, Ptolemy's figure for Salonika is about right, but his figure for Constantinople cites it about 2 degrees too far north. When it comes to regions or islands or provinces, the single figures for them on the sundials are typically within the range of the northernmost and southernmost latitudes stated by Ptolemy. But still, the choices can show strikingly wide variations. In the case of Africa, for example, which occurs on 7 sundials, the latitude figure varies by as much as 11 degrees. It can be as little as 31, and as much as 42. For comparison, Ptolemy has the province of Africa extend through 8 degrees, from 25 to 33. Spain also occurs 7 times, and its single figure varies by 7 degrees, from 35 to 42. Ptolemy has it extend through 10 degrees, from 36 to 46. The lack of variation to be found elsewhere seems all the more notable, therefore. Most striking is the case of Italy, which is listed 8 times, always with the figure 42 or 43, even though Italy spans many more latitudes than that, in Ptolemy from 38 to 45. To me, as a historian interested in ancient worldview and mental mapping, as Alex Jones kindly said at the beginning, it's instructive to realize that whoever compiled 5 of the lists undoubtedly made latitude their organizing principle. In other words, what I mean is they arranged the location names in latitude order. So I infer that these people were willing and able somehow to visualize the Roman Empire and even the world latitudinally. This is really very remarkable. You find it on, you find it on 5 of the lists. I'm only showing you 2 here, but the 5 are British Museum in Greek, and the Time Museum, which you've got here, also in Greek, and the Memphis one, which is also Greek. And then in 2 of the Latin ones, Vignacourt and Merida. And I should explain here that for the purposes of setting out the lists on paper like this, what I've always done is started at the lowest latitude and then just gone on from there. Because I've got to do something when putting it on paper, but I want to stress to you that if you look at the sundials themselves, they don't tell you where to begin. They're just merry-go-rounds. The names just keep going on, and you can start wherever you like. There isn't an explicit indication of where to begin. But so you see what I'm talking about, that here you go, 16, 24, 28. Sorry, this sounds a bit like sort of reading the football results on Saturday nights in England on the television. I apologize for that. But 28, 31, 31, 32, 32, 34, 35, 36. You can see how it's done. 30, 33, 34, 35, 37, 40. Okay? I mean, you get the idea. There seems to be, again, the same principle of organization for latitude, or more or less on 4 further sundials. That's the Science Museum one in Greek, the one downstairs, Crete Châtellard and Rome, and the Oxford one in Latin. In addition, in the exceptional case of the Philippi sundial, which is a somewhat different type of design, a principle for criterion for the selection of the 4 cities, it just has these 4 cities, must be, I think, the perception that these 4 were located more or less at successive 5-degree intervals. But on no other sundial is there reason to think that it was methodical coverage of successive latitudes which served to determine the choice of names. The choice is much more idiosyncratic, I think, there. So it didn't bother the compiler of the Vignacourt list, for example, that if you look through this, you have no name at latitudes 31, 32, 36, 38, or 39, but you have 2 names at several higher latitudes, and you actually have as many as 4 names at latitude 46. So whoever put this list together wasn't trying to give you a place at every latitude or every couple of latitudes. As I say, it's much more personal, it's much more idiosyncratic. Something else that evidently did not bother the compiler of the Vignacourt list was one glaring departure from the principle that the name should appear in latitude order. And if you hadn't noticed this, I've given it to you in yellow. This is Belgica. Belgica, which is misplaced, and not, I am sure, by accident. So you've got this way, Lugdunensis 46, Aquitania 45, that way, Noricum 46, Rhaetia 46, Illyricum 46, and then Pannonia 49. So what's Belgica doing here? It's dotted the right place, is it? Not if you're being latitudinal. Well, my hunch is, and again, you don't have to believe me, but we can talk about this more later if you want to, happy to do it. My hunch is that whoever put this list together also has in his or her head a competing mental map. It's a mental map which envisages the Roman Empire as a jigsaw of provinces. Think of those jigsaws your small children did, or mine did, with the 48 states, or the counties of England, or the provinces of Canada, or something, and you envisage their different relative locations. And in this mental map, I think that our compiler imagined Narbonensis and Aquitania and Lugdunensis and Belgica, or certainly these three at least, as a block. And so when he was having these two, he wanted to put Belgica next to them, even though latitudinally that's not where Belgica belongs. But in his head, he also was thinking about them as a block. And I think also that there is the pull here for Belgica. I think this may well be his home province, because where this sundial was picked up was on the site. It's a random find, but it's well documented that it came from a villa near Saint-Maro-Brive here in modern Amiens in the north of France, and that's in the province of Belgica. So for this reason, he wanted to privilege Belgica as an exception in his arrangement by latitude. And I think that also explains why he didn't do what you might think he could have done, and that is switch these two. Because if he put Calecchia out of order before Narbonensis, then Calecchia is Galicia, that's northwestern Spain, that would have been next to Spain. And then Narbonensis, which is the southern Gallic province, would have been next to Aquitania, and then he would have actually had all four Gallic provinces together, but he didn't do that. And I think that he's fighting two worldviews. And he said to himself, we're going to do this in latitude order, but what about Belgica? Well, he's prepared to let that one go because this is home pride, but he's not going to do it for other regions. This is at least my speculation. Let's look next at the names and latitude figures on these two Greek sundials, Aphrodisias and Samos. Now, initially, when you look at these names, I think there doesn't seem any rhyme or reason to the order. The latitude figures don't help. It just seems to be a jumble. They've just been thrown together. They've never actually attracted any comment. And so what the heck is going on here? And the answer I propose is, and this came to me, I may say, not today, a while ago, on another flight from Raleigh to LaGuardia, and it's amazing how that stretch of territory seems to have terribly turbulent air. And this was a really bumpy flight, and I was thinking, but the bumps helped. Because suddenly it struck me that what you've got to do here is allow yourself to go from one name to the next. And if you do that, what you get is a tour. What we'd call a tour or a cruise, or what a Greek would have called a periegesis, or a periodos, or a periplus. And that's the traditional Greek descriptive term for a tour or a circuit. It can be imagined or real. It can be by sea or by land or both, of a shoreline or a region or even the entire world. And if you look here at the Aphrodisias one, and if you want to follow with the names on your handout, you can see how it goes. This is the furthest south point here. You come up through Egypt. You go this way to Carthage. Now, it's a bit sort of messy because you can't really have breaks and so on, but you could get the idea. And you come round here, then we go really over here, and then we come back, and then finally we come through Rhodes, Sicily, up to Rome, then off to Gaul, specifically Bordeaux, and down into Spain, specifically Emerita or Merida. It's a Mediterranean tour. And of course, because it's presented as a merry-go-round, you can start anywhere you like. I mean, you could start at the other, you could do it in reverse, like the cruise brochures say. Some departures go the other way, or you could start anywhere you like, and it's just presented as a loop. Of course, for making a map like this, as I've said, all I can do is really I've put the places at their correct latitudes, and I've given them their correct longitude. So this is of course just a modern sketch map. The Samos style, too, I think one can consider as a tour. The scholar who published this sundial in 1969 didn't see any significance in the ordering of the names, but I think she read some of the latitude figures wrong, and she certainly assumed too readily that Heraclea must mean Heraclea Pontica. And there are lots of Heracleas around, and one thing she didn't consider was that Heraclea might refer to the former city of Perinthus here, which we know from the late 3rd century was renamed Heraclea and became the capital of the new tetrarchic province of Europe, Europos. And this sundial must be later than that because it includes Constantinople in its selections. And if you're willing to entertain the idea that Heraclea refers to this place, not to Heraclea Pontica, then it certainly does make a circuit. I may say that in both these instances, and in others too, especially actually the Oxford sundial, we're left with the distinct impression that before sending the list to be engraved, the designer or the compiler didn't trouble to check the latitude figures adopted against a map using longitude-latitude coordinates, because there are actually, in both cases, quite a number of wrong latitudes. The names still make sense. They still are a tour, but the latitude figures aren't always very accurate. Now, it's true that if before engraving you consulted a map, there the coordinates might not be unfailingly accurate either, but at least some of the serious mistakes in latitude figures might have been caught. But since this wasn't done, I think we have here another sign that educated Romans, even educated Romans, while they were aware of maps, paid little attention to them. They saw the world by other means. Well, now I would like to move to addressing some related questions that you may even have been formulating in your head yourself, and you may be itching to ask, two in particular. And this is cards on the table. This is being very blunt and frank. First, now, come on. Who in the Roman world would really need or even want a sundial, whether fixed or portable? Get real. Why not just glance up at the position of the sun in the sky, and you'll know roughly what time it is. Of course, the sun has got to be shining, but then it's got to be shining for the sundial to work too. After all, this was a society where there was nothing like our modern precision timing. There were no trains leaving at 10:58. There was no bid on eBay closing at 7:16. And time's getting on, by the way. If you're going to capture that bid, you better hurry, because 7:16 is approaching soon. There's nothing like this in the ancient world. Second, the question, even if you had one of these portable sundials, how accurately, in fact, would it tell you the time? Well, in answer to the first question, it's true that, strictly speaking, nobody needed a sundial. Even so, there can be no doubt that by the period of the Roman Empire, fixed ones were common in towns and cities, both in private households and in public places. And so far, for example, from Pompeii, as many as 36 have been recovered. We know of 36 sundials from Pompeii alone. Moreover, it's true that the matter of just what hour of the day it is really could demand your attention. You are summoned to appear in court, for example, at the 3rd hour. You are entitled to draw water from this aqueduct between the 4th and the 6th hours. Gentlemen, the baths are for women only between the 6th and the 8th hours. Ladies, too, you might like to know that. You are invited to dinner at the 9th hour, and so on. This really did feature in many people's lives, in at least, well, I suppose we should say the urban civilization of Greece and Rome in the Roman Empire, and it was an unusually urbanized society. Now still, from our modern perspective, a Roman sundial's time-telling had considerable limitations. The best that any such sundial could do, and of course again only when the sun was shining, was to tell you where on its course from rising to setting the sun was, with reference to the commonly agreed 12 divisions or hours of daylight. So the day from sunrise to sunset is divided into 12 hours. So the sundial's hour is always a flexible period. It is not the fixed period of time that we agree upon today. And as you realize, in that case, there were likely to be marked variations in the length of an hour, depending upon the season and the latitude at which you find yourself. Even at Rome itself, 1/12 of the daylight period in midsummer is, in terms of modern fixed hours, 1¼ hours, whereas just before Christmas in deep winter, it's as little as 3/4 of a modern fixed hour. And as I'm sure you know, if you've ever been on Hadrian's Wall in winter, the variation is even greater then. I had, in fact, it was a real pleasure of spending a week in Aberdeen in Scotland early in December, and I can assure you that 1/12 of the daylight period then is gone by in a flash, because the sun sets at about 3 p.m., the way that we think of it. So to that extent, you know, all these hours aren't really a very efficient indicator. Even so, despite such limitations, it's clear that sundials did come to be used widely. And in fact, some people were clearly obsessive about hours, so much so that we can imagine them wanting to have a sundial to hand at all times. A remarkable master's thesis written by Simeon Ehrlich in 2012 at the University of Western Ontario assembled over 800 funerary inscriptions in Latin, which record either the length of the dead person's life in years, months, days, and hours, or the month and the hour at which the death occurred. Now, if you know anything about ancient inscriptions and their miserable survival rate, 800 such inscriptions is an astonishingly high total. One possible concern that prompts this kind of precision is a preoccupation with astrology, or more specifically with genethliology, the science of births and casting horoscopes. The reckoning that the configuration of the heavens at the exact time and place of a person's birth could predict their character and fortunes. Equally, there was the belief that as soon as a person on Earth died, they would immediately be reborn into an afterlife in the underworld. So if you knew the hour of their death, then you could determine what their prospects in the next world were likely to be. Now, as you realize, if you've been downstairs, astrology is another whole dimension of the Time and Cosmos exhibition. It's one that is beyond my expertise, but Stefan Hyland writes about it in the catalogue, and I think he's due to lecture on this here next month, and he's well worth hearing. If you want to look at the full thesis, it's easily available free online. On to the second question that I posed. Would one of these portable sundials tell you the time accurately? The answer is yes. In principle, it could. If it was well designed, if you used it on a day that was sunny and calm, because you don't want the thing jogging around in the breeze, if the latitude figure you had for your location really was correct. Well, in practice, not all these conditions were necessarily going to be met. You might well not be sure about the latitude of the location on your journey. And as we've noted, even if you were at the location listed on your sundial, the figure given for it there might be wrong, and sometimes seriously so. In addition, it's not a helpful convention, as I've mentioned earlier, that a region or a province should be listed with only one latitude figure. As users must have known, in fact, Italy or Britain or Gaul or Spain or Egypt extend through several degrees of latitude. So the Oxford sundial, for example, lists latitude 30 for Egypt. But that won't be much good if you're in the south of Egypt, where the latitude would be, say, 25. That's a 5-degree difference, which is big. Well, now, a third and bolder question may be forming in your mind. Given the prospect that such portable sundials often wouldn't have functioned very accurately for a variety of reasons, dare we imagine that really their owners didn't care, because they never intended to use them much anyway? Now, that's obviously a very unmodern thought. To us, it would seem crazy to be happy with a watch or an iPhone that we bought if it turned out not to work very well. And if that happened to us, we would be going back to the Apple store incandescent with rage that this thing doesn't work. We'd want to be given a replacement that does. We wouldn't be happy with what we got. But that's because the reliable workings of the instrument are central to us. Roman circumstances and many Romans' outlook were not necessarily the same, however. Let's now remember, I'm sorry to say this, but it's true, Roman gentlemen seldom did much for themselves. They had slaves and freedmen to take care of all the chores for them. And the chores would undoubtedly include preparing a portable sundial to function if you owned one and wanted to see it work. For you, the owner, seeing it work wasn't necessarily its only attraction or even the main one. To begin with, this thing is so small, so shiny, so cute. I've got to have one. I've got to have one. It's such a thrill. And that's what we feel about many iPhones and flash drives and things today, isn't it? They're just so exciting to have, even if we can't understand all their workings or don't use all the doohickeys associated with them. And if you did use your portable sundial out in the open on a journey, you'd attract attention as a cool dude. Someone with a mastery of time and space, awesomely learned and powerful. What a guy. People would gather round, and they want to know how this marvelous gadget worked. And you'd have the pleasure of showing off your knowledge. Now, you might not get it all right, But then what passing rustic yokel is going to dare contradict you? You can just show off, shoot the breeze, tell them all about it as you understand it. And even if you just kept the sundial in a display case at home, in your Wunderkabinet, it was still a great talking point to impress guests with before dinner. A most enviable prestige object. Once you were hooked by this kind of gadget, then ingenious designers might compete to offer you an improved model. Like this rather nifty one. You've got to really see a drawing. If you see the real thing, it doesn't actually help much. And as you can see, this has 12 options. It has 12 places, and it's missing an arm. But with this, when you move the arm to the place, so this is Rhodes here, or that's Babylon there, then automatically it sets for that latitude. There are no latitude numbers on this. There are no latitude figures. Now this is obviously, for somebody who's a bit challenged by numbers and things. It's the kind of thing, dare I say it, I'll get shot for this, but you could palm the wife off with. Bless her, she's no good at figures, but she's interested in this kind of thing. And this would be especially easy to use one that she could have. Now, it's not versatile in the sense that it only works for those 12 places. You can't set it for anywhere, but then that kind of person probably wouldn't want more. On the sundial that you commissioned would be listed places that had special meaning for you. Among them, no doubt, memorable places that you had visited, and maybe others that you dreamed of visiting, as well as a few that were just exotic fantasy, like Babylon. I mean, what are the chances if you're going to Babylon? Whether the owner of the Memphis sundial ever had done an Aegean cruise, visiting Gortyn, Rhodes, Argos, Athens, Delphi, we don't know. It doesn't really matter. It was a nice thought to have. And if your mailbox is like mine, we get bombarded by Viking cruises twice daily with their brochures and so on, so you could imagine what you might do. Again, whether the owner of the Aphrodisias dial had ever gone on that Mediterranean tour, we don't know. But it's a lovely prospect. And certainly there were people who had done this kind of thing, and there's a very boastful veteran, Aurelius Gaius, who comes from Phrygia here, and he puts up a very boastful inscription, and I've mapped it for you here, about his military career in the 290s, and he said, I made a circuit of the Roman Empire. He literally, if you know your Greek, he says, kouklousas tein hegemonian. I had gone round the world, the Roman world, and you can see it is this kind of periplus, periegesis, the way he lists it, just like on the Aphrodisias sundial. And think about this. This is a nice souvenir that presumably a soldier who had been stationed at the western end of Hadrian's Wall had commissioned, because round the top here in a band, you've got the names of forts at the western end of Hadrian's Wall. If by chance you're familiar with the names of Roman provinces, you'll notice that Aurelius Gaius never uses a province name instantly recognizable as one of those introduced by Diocletian and his co-emperors around 300, when they drastically redrew the provincial boundaries and created horrible names like Maxima Caesariensis in Britain, or Asiana, or Phrygia Prima. And it's striking that the lists for province names on the sundials too are equally anachronistic. They're out of date. Even though we know, as we've seen, that 6 of the Greek sundials include Constantinople, so they're after 300. I think this is a deliberate preference for traditional names. We can find it elsewhere. And I think for educated Romans, it's a sort of modest way of quietly expressing nostalgia for the good old days. And the sundials, remember, are private objects, so perhaps you can get away with this. The lists on the sundials project a sense of Roman identity in other ways too. Notice the evident concern that each list, pretty much, takes in both East and West. Certainly the emphasis may vary. The Greek ones, not surprisingly, show more preoccupation with the East, the Latin ones with the West and the North. But still, all recognize the full span, even the Merida one. This is very Latin, it's very northern and western, but notice Alexandria in Egypt is included. This is the full span of the empire. And of course, even beyond, some of them mention Babylon, the Memphis one even mentions India. There's pride, too, in the sense projected by the lists that the owner of this sundial feels free to travel wherever he or she wishes to any of the locations listed. These are places, I could go. They're on my bucket list. I might get there one day. I have this in mind. And this underlines the freedom of movement that a Roman citizen is very proud of. And, of course, the journey will be feasible. The Roman army and navy maintain peace, and the infrastructure is in place. Again, I don't need to remind you of all those Roman roads, the rivers and the Mediterranean kept free of pirates, and the great harbors built by Rome. Not only do the sundial lists boost the owner's proud sense of identity as a Roman, but also having such a sundial marks out its owner as a cosmopolitan person of distinction. Someone with the apparent capacity to master time and space. Someone who can even envisage the world latitudinally. In our modern world, compare the image which traditional Swiss watchmakers have been promoting in their struggle against digital timepieces from the 1970s onwards. When Raymond Weil died in 2014, the obituary in the New York Times praised the way in which he and others sought to reposition Swiss watches, traditional ones, as paragons of haute fashion, an emotional product carrying a message about the authenticity, the uniqueness, and excellence of the wearer. In a similar way, the globe-trotting pop star and serious watch collector, very serious watch collector, John Mayer, has spoken of his watch as a grounding mechanism, a home base. Mayer's candid about indulging his urge to commission expensive, unique pieces from the well-known Geneva maker Patek Philippe. Remember its advertisements, they stress the long-term value of their watches as family heirlooms. You never actually own a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation. But at the same time, Mayer also admits to gaining immense pleasure and satisfaction from the sense of being just one enthusiast among many in the watch community. I suspect, as you gather, that there was something of a portable sundial owners community among Romans too. And the reasons why those in it loved such ingenious mini gadgets surely ranged far beyond just telling the time. Thank you.